How beer was made. Beer, a beverage that millions of people around the world savor every sip of each day. Widely associated with fun times alongside friends and family, be it at home or at a bar. It's become such a prevalent drink that it might even be taken for granted at this point, without any thought given as to how it even came to be. So, in this video, we're going to tell you just that. If you're curious about where beer came from, who first brewed it, and how, stick around, because the answer might not be what you expect. Origins. Most people today might associate beer with taverns in Europe. Large pitchers foaming at the top, served to crowds of customers by pretty beer maidens. However, the origin of beer dates back to a much older era in a much different place, which you won't expect. You see, beer is such an old drink that it actually dates back to ancient civilizations thousands of years ago, where early humans discovered the process of fermentation. The earliest known brewers of beer were actually the Sumerians, who inhabited the fertile plains of Mesopotamia in about 4000 BCE, known today as Iraq. They were a resourceful bunch with highly developed and advanced tools in their arsenal, making it little surprise that they were the first to brew beer. The Sumerians held their creation in high regard, considering it a staple of their daily lives. Beer was drunk in large volumes by all social classes, from laborers to priests to even royalty. Early recipe. The oldest surviving recipe for beer comes from a Sumerian poem known as Hymn to Ninkasi, who was considered their goddess of brewing. The poem served as a hymn to Ninkasi, but also contained a rather detailed recipe for brewing beer. The Sumerians' primary ingredient for beer was barley, a grain well suited for fermentation because of its high starch content. Clean water was another crucial ingredient, one that was made readily available by the Sumerians' sophisticated system of irrigation and skill at managing water resources. Apart from this, some evidence suggests the use of bread and emmer wheat to help with the fermentation process, which would have introduced yeast and enzymes into the mix. The Sumerians' process began by first soaking the barley grains in water. This allowed the grains to absorb moisture and activate the enzymes that would convert the starches into sugars. Once soaked, the grains would have been allowed to germinate, which, of course, is the natural process that allows seeds to sprout when growing. Something you may have noticed your onions in the fridge doing if you keep them in there too long. For our barley grain, the germination would further activate enzymes that are crucial for the conversion of starches into fermentable sugars. Once enough germination had taken place, the sprouts would be dried in a process called kilning, which would put a stop to the germination process. From here, the real crux of the recipe begins. The dried grains would be crushed into a coarse flour, known as batter, which was mixed with water to create a mash. The mash would then be heated to convert the starches within to sugars, creating a sugary liquid known as wort. To get as much wort as possible, the heated mash would be filtered to remove any solid residue. This wort would then be boiled, both for sterilization purposes and also to extract the underlying flavors and aromas from the grains. This is where the taste of the ancient Sumerian beer would have come from. After boiling, the wort would be cooled and transferred to fermentation vessels that were not sealed and kept open, where the natural yeast and other microorganisms present in the environment would initiate fermentation. Once fermentation was complete, the beer would be left to mature for anywhere from a few days to several weeks, depending on the desired flavor and strength of the beer. With that, our ancient Sumerian beer would be complete. History and spread. The popularity of beer in Mesopotamia made its spread to other cultures and locations all but inevitable. Through a combination of trade, cultural exchange, and migration, beer soon made its way all over the world. It had already been present in Egypt as early as 3000 BCE and was about as big there as it was in Mesopotamia. From there, it was a steep slope once the Greeks and Romans were exposed to beer, with their extensive worldwide conquests and cultural interactions, including with Egypt. They adopted and created their own renditions of brewing beer-like drinks, incorporating them into their own cultures. Then, with the expansion of the Roman Empire came the increasing popularity of all manners of brewing, beer included. The the Roman legions even frequently traveled with a mobile bakery, which included the equipment and ingredients needed for brewing. In Nordic and Celtic cultures, such as in Northern Europe, particularly Scandinavia, existing traditions surrounding brewing were seamlessly blended and integrated with the introduction of beer from Southern Europe, going on to create the classic European beer culture that we know today. Beer also made its way to other parts of the Middle East and North Africa as trade routes became more and more fleshed out. Similar to Europe, the existing brewing culture of early societies in these areas was influenced by the arrival of beer. In Asia and the Americas, beer found a lasting foothold because of the European colonization of these areas, with settlers bringing their brewing traditions and adapting them to the local ingredients and techniques. Evolution of beer brewing. Although the ancient Sumerian beer got the job done and laid a solid foundation, their process was a bit rudimentary, relying on natural fermentation with wild yeast, and lacked proper filtration techniques, resulting in somewhat cloudy beer. Fortunately, since then, the recipe has come a long way, with numerous improvements in both the ingredients and the techniques used. These improvements started with the Egyptians, who refined brewing techniques by developing better methods for mashing and fermenting the grains. After that, further improvements came in the form of the Greeks and Romans, who improved filtration methods and introduced the use of herbs and spices for flavoring. The Romans' contribution goes even further, as they developed some sophisticated equipment that included improved fermentation vessels, storage containers, and tools for milling and mashing grains. With the spread of beer to medieval Europe, it was picked up by monasteries, who quickly became centers of brewing excellence. The monks of that time, known for their attention to detail and discipline, further refined brewing techniques. They introduced hops as a flavoring and preserving agent, a contribution that revolutionized beer production. Later, in 1516, Germany regulated beer production by passing the Beer Purity Law, which stipulated that only water, barley, and hops could be used, a rule that would shape German brewing traditions for centuries to come. Pretty interesting that the original ingredients used by the Sumerians of ancient Mesopotamia were passed as a law thousands of years later. They were definitely onto something back then. The next big changes in beer production came in the form of the Industrial Revolution between the 18th and 19th century, which, as you can expect, was a turning point for large-scale beer production. It introduced advanced machinery, such as the steam engine, leading to never-before-seen levels of large-scale beer production. Improved bottling and packaging methods that came as a result of the technological advancements allowed for even wider distribution and popularity. This era also featured the discovery of lagering, a method of storing beer at cold temperatures, leading to the development of bottom-fermenting yeasts and the creation of lager beer. This became one of the most popular styles of beer globally. Next, from the late 19th to the early 20th century, Louis Pasteur's research on microorganisms and pasteurization had a huge impact on brewing. It led to a better understanding and control over yeast fermentation, significantly improving the consistency and quality of beer. Emil Hansen's work on pure yeast cultures further revolutionized the brewing process. It allowed for consistent, predictable fermentation and the development of various yeast strains. Later, starting from the late 20th century, came the resurgence of interest in traditional and small-scale brewing, causing the emergence of the craft beer movement. These craft brewers focused on new and innovative techniques, unique ingredients, and experimental styles which led to further development of beer quality. Since then, our highly advanced present-day technology and scientific understanding of the brewing process allows us to produce better beer than ever before. With automated factories, computer-controlled fermentation processes, and large-scale packaging and shipping techniques, we have the ultimate control over the beer we create. Modern beer brewing also often tries to emphasize sustainability and quality control, with breweries commonly turning to eco-friendly practices that minimize the damage to the environment, as well as quality insurance measures like lab testing and packaging checks. So, there you have it. That was how beer made its way from the fields of ancient Mesopotamia to your fridge, a journey spanning thousands of years, condensed into a few engaging minutes. Hopefully, you have an excuse to show off your newfound knowledge at the next gathering you attend, perhaps over a glass of beer. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.